we will call to order the meeting of the Bedford Township Board of Zoning Appeals for a regular meeting February 1st, 2021. First, we'll call to order and introduce members and representatives of the board. We'll start with staff first.
Karen Kincaid, Planning and Zoning.
Jody Rector, Planning and Zoning.
Bill Goldsmith, Township Attorney.
Joe Gore, Bedford Township Trustee Rep.
Bob Potter, alternate.
Jeff Wilson, committee member.
Kyle Durst, Vice Chair.
Jake Lake, Chair. Thanks, everybody. Next, we'll stand and face a flag and do the Pledge of Allegiance, if we have a flag close by. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Ms. Kincaid, if you wouldn't mind doing the roll call.
Yes, Kyle Dersch.
Aye.
Joe Gore.
Aye.
Bob Potter.
Aye.
Jeff Wilson.
Here.
Jake Lake.
Present. Thank you. All right, and next one is we'll do the approval of the agenda for tonight's board meeting. Is there any amendments, or are we good with the agenda as is?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Second.
All right, we have a motion. We have a second. Just get a quick, if you're in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Agenda approved. Next, we'll go to approval of the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting schedule for 2021. Is there any objections to the schedule? All right, if there are no objections, Ms. Kincaid.
I was just going to say there are no changes. We have moved some dates around where it conflicts with holidays. When the first Monday falls on a holiday, that is reflected on the schedule. We may have to make a change in May. There is an election on the first Tuesday, which is obviously following the first Monday. And if the clerk's department will require the boardroom or the area where George does the videoing, and we are still meeting virtually, we may have to change that date. We aren't certain yet.
Thank you. All right, is there a motion that we approve the schedule for 2021?
Yes.
I'll make the motion. I'll
Second.
move that we approve the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting schedule for 2021.
All right, is there a support?
Yeah, I would second that.
Ms. Kincaid, do we have to do a actual roll call vote, or can we just do an aye?
I would be fine.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the meeting schedule for 2021, please say aye.
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 Looks like we all approve. We'll move on next to the election of Board of Zoning Appeals officers for 2021, and we'll look for, yes. Great.
Good
Thank
evening,
you.
everybody.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening.
All right. So we're on to item number 6, which would be election of Board of Zoning Appeals officers for 2021. So we'll look for any recommendations or motions to nominate.
I'll go ahead and make a motion for Mr. Lake to remain chairman of the board for the 2021 meeting.
Is that a nomination, Kyle, for Jake Lake to serve as chairman?
Yes, sir, nomination.
Okay, are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, it would be appropriate, Kyle, to make a motion to appoint Jake Lake as the chairman for this year.
All right. I'll make a motion to appoint Mr. Jake Lake to chairman of the Board of Zoning Appeals for the 2021 sessions.
I'll second that if I may.
All right,
That
no
does require
objection.
a roll call vote.
Mr. Dersch,
Aye.
Mr. Potter,
Aye.
Mr. Gore,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Lake.
Aye.
Motion carried.
All right, and I would like to make a motion for nominate Mr. Kyle Dersch as vice chair for 2021.
Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, a motion has been made by Jake Lake to, for Kyle Durst to serve as vice chair for 2021. Needs a second and then a roll call vote.
I would second that nomination.
Mr. Lake,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Potter,
Yes.
Mr. Gore,
Yes.
Mr. Dersch.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Move on to item number 7, which is approval of the minutes of our November 9th, 2020. So looking for somebody that was there during that meeting on November 9th, if they would make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the minutes of the November 9th, 2020 meeting.
Oh, I would second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, we'll move on to new business. Looks like we have all 5 members here. First piece of new business is a public hearing for the appeal of Mr. Mark Perrin, requesting a, thank you. This would be a public hearing for the appeal of Mark Perrin, requesting a plus or minus 4 acreage variance for 1 parcel to create a total of 3 parcels in an agricultural zoning district. Before I open the public hearing, Karen, if you don't mind telling us a little bit more about this.
Okay, the applicant is Mr. Mark Perrin of 13324 Ida West Road in Petersburg, Michigan. He did elect to speak for himself, and the variance location is 744 and 762 East Samaria Road, property number 5802 001 021 05, and there are 70.935 acres in an agriculturally zoned district. The applicant is seeking to split a 70.93 acre parcel with 2,124.94 feet of frontage on Samaria Road and 665.46 feet of frontage on Minks Road to create 3 parcels. The subject parcel contains 2 prior legal non-conforming dwellings where the applicant is requesting to create 3 parcels, 1 for each home and 1 parcel to maintain the remaining 64.93 acres as farmland. The application has proposed maintaining one of the existing homes having the existing address of 762 East Samaria Road, located on the southeast corner of Minks and East Samaria Roads, to maintain 1 acre and 330 feet of frontage on Minks Road per section 400/1800 Schedule of Regulations, where it is required that agricultural zoning districts have 5 acres and 330 feet of frontage, thus requiring the variance of 4 acres to create the proposed parcel. Should this request be granted, the proposed land division, which is approved by the assessing department, will bring the existing home closer to compliance, creating it as an individual parcel with suitable water and septic. That was approved by the Monroe County Health Department. Parcel 2 would be maintaining one of the existing homes, having the existing address of 744 East Samaria, maintaining 5 acres, 348 feet of frontage on Samaria Road. The applicant noted in the submitted letter, the home is a historic home and would maintain all the existing accessory structures on the resulting parcel to preserve the history. As this proposed parcel meets the requirements by ordinance, no variance request is required. However, should the request for parcel 1 be granted, allowing the applicant to move forward with the land division process, it would bring the existing home into compliance by ordinance, subject to approval from the assessing department for the land division and the Monroe County Health Department with the well and septic. Parcel 3, maintaining the 64.93 acres of farmland with 1,641.9 feet of frontage on Samaria Road and 335.46 feet of frontage on Minks Road. The applicant noted the submitted letter. He purchased the property due to the amount of arable land it contained for agricultural operation. As this proposed parcel meets the requirements by ordinance, no variance request is required, subject to approval from the assessing department through the land division process. Should the variance request be granted, the variance required is a 4-acre plus or minus area variance. At this time, no letters or calls of objection have been received. Should the board's decision be granted, the required variance, it should be included in the motion that the applicant worked with the assessing department of the land division process and with Monroe County Environmental Health on approvals of septic and or wells for each resulting parcel maintaining a home. I would like you to refer to the map in your packet where it does show, it's outlined in red, the entire parcel that is in existence at this time. There are 2 homes on the east side of the creek that runs through the property. Right now, those 2 homes are in existence. The applicant is not seeking to increase the number of dwellings on the property. They would like to split those parcels off from the farmland and maintain the farmland for farming purposes. So it would create the 1 home to the west, again, would not require a variance because it does maintain at least 330 feet of frontage and a minimum of 5 acres. The home to the east that abuts Minks Road and Samaria on the corner does have 330 feet of frontage on Minks Road. However, it only has 1 acre in size. So that would be the parcel that actually requires the 4-acre variance.
Thank you, Ms. Kincaid. I will look to open the public hearing and then we'll bring the applicant on to maybe add to what Ms. Kincaid said. We have a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll second that.
All right, we got a motion, we got a second. All in favor, open the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. All right, public hearing is open, and I believe we have Mr. Perrin on the phone.
Yes, I'm on there.
Hello, Mr. Perrin. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to what Ms. Kincaid said about the application here. If there's anything you want to add to it, or if she's captured it all for you.
She's done a very well job. Thank you.
All right, so we have the public hearing open. I don't know if we have others on the line that would like to invite for any public comment. Okay. Well, then what I will do is while we're waiting, I'll leave the public hearing open and then just open it up for any questions or comments from the group here. If we've got any questions for the applicant or additional questions for Ms. Kincaid. Okay, great. This is looking for any public comment regarding the property on the corner of Minks and Samaria Road.
Okay, my name is Gail Kane, and I'm from 1056 West Temperance. I'm just a question so that I can be informed. Is there any restrictions in the future for that farmland to have a structure put on it. Ms. Kincaid made a comment that the people want to keep it into farming. What would have to happen should they suddenly decide they want a subdivision on there or some other, because my understanding with the BZA, you cannot profit and you have to prove hardship. So I'm just curious, what would be the restraints or the constraints to making that property something other than farming parcel? Thank you.
Want to speak to that, or do we have anyone else?
Karen, did you want me to respond?
You can respond, and I think Mr. Perrin also may want to comment on that, but if you want to respond, that would be fine.
Well, probably appropriate for Mr. Perrin to respond first, and then I can fill in any blanks if necessary.
I'm sorry, you were cutting out there a bit, Mr. Goldsmith. What was that again?
It would be appropriate for Mr. Perrin to respond to Ms. Keene's comment, and then I can fill in any blanks if required or necessary.
Sure. Mr. Perrin, if you wouldn't mind answering the question, that'd be great.
My intentions, I farm, so I want to continue farming the land. That's the only intentions I have.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the way I see this as presented by the applicant, the initial practical difficulty that the board is presented with is that you currently have two homes on one parcel. And as Karen indicated, that if this variance request is approved, the home to the west would be a conforming parcel in an agricultural zoning district because it would have 330 feet of frontage on a public road, and it would contain 5 acres of area. So it would be conforming if the variance is granted because you would no longer have two homes on the same parcel. The home to the east would be, a variance would be required for that if you approve this request, because although it has 330 feet of frontage, it only has 1 acre of area. However, in looking at the map that's been presented and the layout of the land and the location of the drain, it would appear that the request, recognizing the practical difficulty, is a reasonable request because the balance of the land to the north would be kept in agricultural production. To answer Ms. Keene's question, if this property were to be developed into something other than farmland, this applicant or owner or any future owner would have to go through, in my view, a rezoning process. They would have to prove that infrastructure is available to support any type of use other than agricultural. And where this property is located in the area of our township, it's going to be unlikely that the infrastructure would be there to support that. However, none of us know what the future holds, but those would be my comments. But there would be a rezoning and site plan approvals and everything that goes with that to change the use of this land from agricultural to some other use that would support multiple dwelling units on it. Karen, you may want to add anything into that you see fit.
No, I was just going to say separating the two homes brings at least closer to conformity, because right now we have two homes on one parcel, and we would certainly like to see those at least be within their own parcel rather than having two homes on one parcel. That's the only one to add. I know Mr. Perrin has worked closely with the health department to ensure that each could have their own septic, as there is no water or sanitary sewer in this area, and each have their own well. So that is one step that we did recommend, and he did follow through to ensure that we're not going to get into a situation in which the parcels are created separately, should they be.
Thank you, Mr. Perrin, Mr. Goldsmith, Ms. Kincaid. We still have an open public hearing, so if there are any others that are on the phone that would like to make any public comments towards the variance request for the property on the corner of Samaria and Minks, you may ask your question or make your comments now. All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Welling. If there are no other comments, we can make a motion to close the public hearing at this point and go on to discussion.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll support.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Public hearing is now closed. So we can now go into the discussion part of the hearing here. If there is anybody that would like to ask any additional questions or make any additional comments, looks like Mr. Gore's virtual hand is up, so I'll let Mr. Gore go.
All right, thank you. Question is, first, does anybody know how 2 homes got built on 1 parcel, or was that allowed back in the day, or should that have not been built there, or shouldn't something been done back then?
I'm gonna guess it was done well back in the past, before the zoning ordinance required the 5 acres, 3/3 frontage.
Okay. And just piggybacking off of Ms. Keene, the way buildings going around here, I mean, every time you turn around, there's another piece of parcel getting something built on it, whether it be a planned unit development, a subdivision, or whatnot. If we approve the variance, does that open it up? And I know you explained it, Mr. Goldsmith, but would we have a leg to stand on to say, no, we're not going to put a subdivision on that 64 acres?
Yeah, you would, it would have to be, viewed in the light existing at the time and under the ordinances existing at the time if any such application was made. But the way I view this, this particular application, and I think Karen commented on this, it's taking care of a situation where we have 2 homes on 1 lot, which is not preferred, and which I think happened, like Dennis said, many, many years ago. In terms of the development of the rest of that farmland, I mean, they would have to comply with the ordinance. So to that, I would say they could, which they can now if they wanted to, split some of that property off, as long as they split off a parcel that consisted of 330 feet and 5 acres. But that would be their limit. Unless they came back to this board for a variance seeking the development of parcels less than 330 feet and less than 5 acres. So that's one safeguard. If it was just going to be splits or building sites that deviated from the agricultural zoning requirements, it would have to come before this board. If it was going to be the wholesale development of the 60-some acre parcels that remain, and to some more dense development, that would require a whole lot more. It would require a rezoning, the establishment of infrastructure. I don't see that happening in the very near future, but that's what it would require. I hope that is responsive to your question.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks, Phil.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start off with I've got a couple of questions and maybe comments here. It sounds like the due diligence of ensuring that if the two homes were split on separate parcels, they have their own septic, own wells, so they can be completely separate without any issue there. I guess a couple of questions, just maybe understand the issues with having two homes on one parcel. What are the legality issues around having that? I'm assuming there's probably some tax implications for homeowners. I don't know if Ms. Kincaid or Mr. Goldsmith, if you can help explain what the issues would be with having two homes on one parcel.
I'll go first. Well, first of all, if you were going to, as I understand it, those two homes are on one parcel that comprise the entirety of the acreage, which is what, Karen, around 69 acres, give or take, or maybe 70 acres, maybe, with everything. One issue is, and I don't know how our assessing department is assessing it. I assume there's just one tax bill, and it takes into consideration that there are all those structures, two homes and the outbuildings that exist there. So if, for instance, if Mr. Perrin wanted to sell the home that is the smaller home that he wants to make into 1 acre, he couldn't do that. Couldn't sell that off without the variance he's requesting and without a land division. So that could not be done. Two homes would remain on one large parcel. So from a taxation point of view, I would imagine that if this is split and there would be 3 tax parcels created. One for the 1 acre lot, one for the 5 acre lot, and one for the remaining 64.93 acres, I think it is. And so that might and probably would increase tax revenue for the township, because now you're taxing 2 residential dwelling units plus the farmland. So that would be my educated guess on the tax part of it, but our assessing department would have to give us the final information on that. Karen, is there anything you could add?
I'm not certain how it's being assessed. I know it is all within one parcel number. So I believe it's probably all coming on one tax bill with the 2 homes and the farmland. I know the one is a historical home. I concur with Dennis Kohler. I believe this was created far before 1977, given that the one home is a historical home. That's when our ordinance went into effect, because we would today not create or allow for 2 homes to be constructed on one site.
Just another follow-up question around, so if you have 2 homes on one parcel, it would be an impossibility then to sell one of the homes and have another family live there? Or is...
Yes, you couldn't transfer one home right now without the entire parcel.
Okay.
The other thing to think about is, and I believe Karen's correct, if those homes were created there, built there prior to the adoption of our zoning ordinance, which was in 1977, then that creates a prior legal non-conforming use and prior legal non-conforming structures. And although the use would be continued if the board grants this variance, the good thing is it brings it more into compliance with the zoning ordinance, which says now you cannot have more than one home on one parcel.
And I have one question for Mr. Perrin, if he's still there. If we were to take what's being proposed as parcel 1 with the smaller dwelling to the east and make it 5 acres, knowing that we've got the drain and the already existing home, the larger home, that's the historical home, how would you be able to shape 5 acres into that parcel? is it an impossibility, or would it just be a very silly shape that doesn't make a lot of sense? What are some of the practicalities of what that would be?
Well, I was going to try to do it as a rectangle and then follow the ditch line. So the ditch line there would be like a I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to follow the ditch line there. So it's, the ditch line for the west side there, and then do a rectangle for the rest. So it would be a square lot.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I don't believe there is enough acreage remaining on the east side of that ditch. And you can see that the parcel, if you follow the red line or the orange red line, that is the parcel limit. He does not own north of that, where he could create a 5-acre parcel. I do not believe there is enough acreage remaining after he created the 5-acre parcel to the west to create a 5-acre parcel that would follow what we would consider a natural dividing line on the east side of the ditch. I don't believe there are 5 acres there.
Thank you, Ms. Kincaid. All right. Is there any other discussion or questions from the group? Mr. Wilson?
I think maybe to add to your point, or I guess to your question, after Ms. Kincaid mentioned what she did, that if you were to then try to make, considering what was just mentioned, if you were to then somehow make something into 5 acres, right, it would just be a funny shape that crossed the ditch or the drainage, right, and was, very kind of odd shaped over there and kind of surround the remaining 5 acres. It just, could it potentially be done? I suppose so, but it to your point, it makes kind of a funny shape or maybe not a very desirable piece of property, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're saying.
Yeah, most times people own property on the other side of the ditch. They rarely even access it.
Right.
Or
That's why
maintain.
the natural property lines.
It's difficult to maintain on the other side of a ditch when you don't have direct access across that ditch. He would have to find access across that ditch more than likely from west of the west parcel of the large farmland to maintain anything in the way of acreage that would be attached to create 5 acres on the west side of the ditch.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other questions, comments? If there are none, we definitely could entertain a motion if somebody is ready.
I just had one other quick question, if I could, or comment, I guess. Is talking about the wells and the septic and that sort of thing, and that's already been looked at and it's feasible and that sort of thing. Is that something that would typically then be kind of put in this approval as a condition, just to confirm that things would be taken care of in the way that they were confirmed with the is it the health department or the water department or?
Yeah,
could make that
yes,
part of
you
your
can do that. This board, by statute, has the authority to attach reasonable conditions to a motion and the granting of a variance request. In this case, you could make the motion conditioned on approval of the Monroe County Health Department for establishment of a portable water system and a on-site sewage disposal system, which would consist of a septic tank and leach field, or whatever variation of that the health department would approve. including the appropriate isolation distances between the well and the leach field and or the septic tank. That of course would be controlled by the health department, but you can make that a condition of any motion that each resulting parcel with homes on it would comply with those elements.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
I'd like to make a stab at the motion. This is Bob Potter. I would make a motion to approve the variance request that would be a variance of 4 acres in an agriculturally zoned area. So that we would have one home on 1 acre with 330 feet of frontage. One home on approximately 5 acres with a minimum of 330 feet of frontage. And then a third parcel of just farmland. I believe the practical difficulty is the applicant has a parcel of land with 2 homes on it. So this motion for a variance request would bring what would become 3 parcels all closer in compliance with the township zoning regulations.
Real quick, Mr. or Miss Kincaid, on that motion, when he talked about the first 1 acre lot, that wasn't going to have a 333 foot frontage. It was going to be 220, I thought.
They're actually maintaining 330 feet of frontage on Minks Road.
Minks Road. Okay.
So they do maintain the frontage. They cannot maintain the acreage of requirement of 5. So they will require 4.
Okay.
We have a motion. Is there a support?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to add a friendly amendment to that motion if Mr. Potter's okay with it. This approval would be subject to approval by the assessing department for the land division process, as well as approval from the Monroe County Environmental Health for appropriate well and septic on both parcels that will have dwellings on them once the division is complete.
I agree with that friendly amendment. Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have support?
I'd support that. I'd second that.
All right. Mrs. Kincaid, if you would call the roll, please.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Gore?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Aye.
Motion
All right.
carried.
Motion approved. Thank you. All right. We will move on to our next item of business, which is a public hearing for the appeal of Mulch King, requesting a plus or minus 4-foot maximum height variance of all wind rows or any other material being stored on site, a variance of the requirement of the perimeter of the entire site utilized for composting operations to be screened and buffered by means of plantings, and a variance of the requirement of the perimeter of the entire site to be fenced. Before I ask for a motion to open the public hearing, Ms. Kincaid, if you want to give us a summary of what's in there. I know there's a lot there, so perhaps a summary would be sufficient.
Okay. Again, the applicant is Andrew Nitch of Toledo, Ohio. The variance location is 110 West Smith Road. James Jacobs, architect, is been authorized as a representative, although I do believe the owner is also on the line. I don't know if Jim or Chris or both are on the line from Jacobs Architect. The acreage is 16.4 I-2 light industrial. The history is on September 12, 2017, the applicant sought 11 variances to construct a composting facility on the north west corner of Smith and Telegraph Road. At that time, 6 variances were granted. 2 variance requests were withdrawn. 1 was granted with conditions, and 1 had a portion granted and a portion denied. And then 1 was considered by the fire department and approved. We did include a copy of the minutes in your packets for you to review. Then on September 13th, 2017, with a continuation on September 27th, 2017, did require a public hearing, and the Planning Commission took action on the request for final site plan approval with the special approval as required by ordinance, and they took all of the variances that were granted by the BZA into consideration and granted site plan approval. Due to the non-compliance with the site plan approval with special approval is granted on September 27th, 2017, and the removal of the natural tree buffer to the east along Telegraph Road that was approved in lieu of ordinance required plantings and fencing. The applicant is submitting an amended site plan to be considered by the Planning Commission. However, additional variances are required prior to action being taken by the Planning Commission. The removal of those trees did remove what the natural buffer was to serve as the fencing and the planting requirements of the variance that was granted by the BZA. The commercial composting ordinance's entirety, we did include in your packet also for you to take a look at. The variance that they're seeking at this time is a variance that requires the maximum height of all windows or any other material being stored on site shall not exceed a total height of 12 feet. They are seeking a variance. We, as a planning department, could not verify the height of the windows or 2 piles, and that was also highlighted on a plan that we included in your packet to grant a 4-foot height variance from 12 feet to 16 feet. So that's variance number 1. The second variance requires the perimeter of the entire site utilized for composting operations to be screened and buffered by means of planting a double row of evergreens 6 to 8 feet in height at planting with no more than a 15-foot spacing and offset by 8 feet. That portion of the site plan approval was not installed along the west property line. A berm was installed along the south property line in front of the area where the composting, before the trees are removed. However, the plantings do not meet the requirements of the ordinance. The applicant has stated the neighboring west property is heavily wooded to a depth of approximately 200 feet. Although the abutting property is under the same ownership, our landscaping ordinance does state that it should be noted the entire buffering along the west property line is not located within the subject parcel and is entirely located within the parcel located to the west. Our ordinance does state that any landscaping or buffering requirement must be located within the parcel that is to provide the buffering and not on neighboring property. Whether it's under the same ownership or not, if that property is sold and someone decides to remove all of that vegetation and the trees, then the buffering has been eliminated. With respect to the parcel to the east and north, the applicant was granted a variance to utilize the existing vegetation and large tree line on the north and east sides of the property as a buffer between the developed portion of the site and Telegraph Road and Indian Creek. After the site plan was approved, the applicant removed the tree buffer along the southeast and east portion of the parcel, eliminating the granted natural buffer because the fence was not being required, nor were additional plantings being required due to the vegetation and trees along that side that have now been removed, and the site was expanded to include composting materials and stacking and piling. The applicant is seeking a variance to renew the variance to allow visibility of the commercial retail aspects of the business and substitute the internal berm to screen the mulching operation. The berm to screen consists of two 16-foot material piles as are shown on the plan that we submitted to you that they plan to submit to the Planning Commission. Variance 3, the section ordinance states access to the site should be controlled to prevent unauthorized dumping during non-business hours. That requires a fence. That was also waived due to the landscaping and the berm that was going to take place along the south and the west side, and the vegetation that was currently in place when the site plan was approved of the trees, which have now been removed. So now they are seeking to, the fencing required by this section that is contiguous to a residential zoning district to the west shall be used for solid coated decorative fence or the equivalent. Such fence shall be placed behind the buffer area required by this ordinance. The access points to the site shall be controlled by lock gates, which he does have, so we don't have an issue with that. So they are seeking to allow taller windrows. They are asking to allow the landscaping that's on a neighboring property to serve as their buffer to the west, and to eliminate the required fencing and allow the material that is piled to serve as the fence or buffering to the site.
Thank you, Ms. Kincaid. I'll look for a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
We have a second.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor of open the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
All right, our public hearing is open. So before we go too far, I'm wondering if the applicant or Mr. Jacobs is available to add on to anything that Ms. Kincaid covered, or if there's anything else you would like to add.
Sure. Good evening. This is Jim Jacobs. I have with me on the speakerphone Chris Benson, who's been assisting with the project, and I believe Andrew is also here if there's some aspects of this that he may want to chime in on some of the purposes for this. But just to expand a little bit on what was here. The windrow height request is being driven by the tightness of the site in trying to turn the piles and create the mulching that can then be sold after the collection of the lawn debris. With the wetlands, it kind of made the space tight, and we needed to get to a taller height to be able to accommodate the turning over of those piles. Andrew can expand on that a little bit more, but that's the purpose of the request is to be able to have enough space for the debris that's being delivered to the site and turn it over in the fashion that it needs to be for the mulching process to occur.
Thank you, Mr. Welling. Go ahead, Mr. Jacobs.
Okay, and then the screening along the westerly line. One of the concerns that was partly involved with that in the design phase, as well as the comments from some of the planner and engineer in the first site plan approval, was the natural drainage flow comes from that neighboring parcel moving southeast across the site. And we were able to accommodate that with some spillways through the berm, but now at that time he did not own both parcels. And so I don't know if there's a way that that variance can be granted as long as he maintains ownership of that parcel because of the wooded nature of it, or if it's something that has to be addressed on site. But that would be the thought was to make sure that we can maintain good drainage from the neighboring and on site, and with the dense nature of what's there and him owning it, Andrew wanted to request that we would eliminate the berm and the plantings along that westerly line. The purpose of the removal of the trees and the request for the variance on the south east line kind of wraps that corner between Telegraph and Smith Road is both from the standpoint of the 6-foot tall fence and the landscape buffer, is that we're suggesting that the two 16-foot berms that were created in that the catch pond would become the natural buffer to the heavy industrial piece of it, which is the mulching yard behind that he's looking for some retail space to sell the product, to display and sell the product, which is part of the next step of this, is going through the site plan review to get some approval and some thoughts on how that display can be handled on the other side of that berm. But to have the visibility for the commercial or retail aspect of selling what he makes on site is why we're requesting the elimination of the fencing as well as the screening. So those are some of the purposes and the thoughts. Maybe Andrew can speak a little bit more to the hardship that's creating on his site.
Yeah, if I could just bring up a couple more points, but as far as the west side property goes, where I bought the additional 7 acres next door, when we dug the swale along the west side, we used all that soil and made a berm along there. And since that neighboring property has a large section, about 3 acres of wetlands, when the state of Michigan came in, the DEQ at the time, and they inspected it, because we had blocked with that berm that off, all that water was draining back towards the neighbors towards the west on the other side of those woods. So they asked us to cut larger sections of the berm out. I did never put any trees or plantings on there because I did buy the land next door and there's 7 acres of woods. So it seemed kind of pointless to put spruce trees on top of a dirt mound when there's 7 acres of woods there already. So that's why there is half of that does have berm down it, which is the swale, but the other half the state didn't want us to have in because we were ruining the wetland. And then also to add to the southeast corner, another reason that we cleared those trees out of there was behind the 2 large landscaping berms that we made, the 16-foot tall berms. Behind that is all of our processing. So when we process like all the brush, the leaves, the logs, we grind all that stuff up. So when we couldn't have people back there when we're grinding stuff up, it just created a huge safety hazard. Everybody wanted to sit and watch, and then people were driving up behind the loaders or next to the grinder to drop their stuff off. So we cleared that and had people drop their material off for the month or 2 while we do the processing annually, that they could safely drop their stuff off and turn around and go right back out without ever being near any of the giant equipment or any of the safety issues that we were creating by having them processing done. So that was another reason why we did that. There was really nowhere else to send the people or to take them, and then because of the popularity or I guess the amount of use that the township residents have been using our facility for, we had to have somewhere else for them to go. So when we process it, they drop their materials off there, And then when we're done processing, we move all their materials back when we move them going back there again as well. So it's kind of a dual purpose for that area, but it was created again partially out of safety so that we could keep the facility open every day, or else we're going to have to close for a month or two every time we go to grind everything up. And then I thought if we made those 2 giant berms, and we made those instead of, I knew the height requirement was 12 feet, but we wanted 16 feet is as high as our excavator or our largest loader buckets would go. So that's why we really pile them up like that, as a means for space, but also out of convenience for the machinery. So I would think a 16-foot giant berm would act just as good as a buffer for anyone to have to see any of the composting or anything as well, or if not a lot better than a 6-foot spruce tree or a 6-foot privacy fence. So that's why we created the 2 of those. And it's not one long continuous berm because all the compost runoff drains between the 2 into the catch pond that's in the front, which is part of our next phase we'll have to explain anyways. So that was just some points I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up if there is anyone on the phone that would like to make any comments on the current variance requests by the Mulch King.
Hello,
Yes, go ahead. Please state your name and address for the record.
Jane Morin, 6790 Crab Road. Mulch King knew the rules before opening their business. They had a site plan drawn up to convince the township to approve the business on that site. Several years have passed, and the site looks worse than ever. More and more trees have been cut down to make room for more and more non-mulch products. Instead of trying to update the site to be in compliance, they constantly try to beat the system and get the township to bend to their wants while also being paid quarterly by the township. Granting variances to the ordinances for Mulch King could set a bad precedent, so please be careful. I feel the location of Mulch King along Telegraph Road is unfortunate. It says to all the people who travel on Telegraph, welcome to Bedford Township and welcome to Michigan. We can come in and do anything you want, and we don't care.
Mrs. Moore, anybody else on the phone that would like to make a comment on the variance requests?
Hi. Yeah, George, you had me open while she was talking. I'm not sure that's what you want to do. This is Gail Kane, 1056 West Temperance. I have a lot of history here only because I was kind of forced into paying attention to it. I think a lot of our problems are because of the fact that he opened prior to actually having a final site plan approval. It's kind of hard as we're trying to back up, and every time we fix something, he skirts the whole issue in one fashion or another. It was mentioned before he opened that he had a place, someplace in Ohio. It's never been stated where this previously owned compost site was. And I don't know if anybody from the planning department ever went to visit this place. Now, my experience is looking at what Sylvania does, which is visible from the expressway. I've never seen a mound. We've got Mount Everest over there at Telegraph and Smith Road. And you've got to remember that composting stuff can spontaneously combust. It gets heat. That's what part of the process is. I can't imagine what would happen if our fire department had to deal with a fire with these tall, ugly-looking piles of whatever. My other concern here is that this is a commercial composting facility. That's what the paper says. So rulings are being made because he's a composting facility, and yet we're trying to wheel and deal to allow him to become a landscaping company. This is two different things, people. He's either got to be one or he's got to be the other so that your rulings are actually legal and conforming to what it is he wants to be. He opened as a composting facility. End of discussion. That's it. We don't sell trucks, rocks, snow blades, railroad ties. We don't bring in lumber from across the state line or any of that stuff. Now, Ms. Kincaid, Karen, I'm going to ask you a question. You said in 2017 there were 11 variances, 6 of yes, 2 withdrawn, 1 denied. Are any of these 1, 2, or 3 a portion of what was said here? Now, my understanding is that this edge, these trees, he had been told that they had to stay, and he chose to cut them down. I think the public deserves to know if this is true or not. I would advocate that we have a double row and that it must be on his property and certainly not the neighbors. Now, if he's added this 7 acres, I'm assuming this property has been combined. And everybody knows that on Smith Road, from Lewis Avenue all the way down, there's wetlands. And they decided to move Mother Nature for the Luther House, and we all know that Mother Nature doesn't like to be messed with, and they still have flooding at the Luther House. So we have another plan that's coming up there at Lewis and Smith, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, people keep messing with our wetlands. You're also sitting on number 2 county drain. It is the second largest that drains all of Bedford Township into Lake Erie. I want to know where the Drain Commission sits in any of this. Yes, we have Eagle in there. You have not only the Eagle land portion, but you have Eagle water portion that is overseeing this. This has created such a mess that you have not 1, but 2 divisions of Eagle that are overlooking it this way. Now, if he's bought the 7 acres, I'm assuming that it's been added to the property, that it's 1 parcel. So again, he still has to be compliant with putting these protective devices up. He had blue pipes. He was told by Manick and Smith to put those in from the research I've done. And, of course, the water division of Eagle said, absolutely not. You're not draining any of this contaminated water into our number 2 drain. Thank goodness for that. But these high piles, this 12-foot is plenty high enough. I mean, has anybody really gone and looked at this? I agree with Mrs. Morin, who's been an advocate from day 1 against this because it's ugly. It's just plain outright ugly. I know we need a place to take our leaves. I, along with Walt Wilburn and Connie Veliquette, went looking for suitable property because it has to be large. We wanted a classy way of doing it, just like Sylvania does. They don't have these high piles. They have a turner. It goes in and really rotates these piles. So I don't believe they should be allowed to be higher than 12 foot. And the fence, I think you need to be able to see a little bit of what's going on in there, because right now I question everything he does as if he's trying to hide behind these berms. And these berms are dirt. They grow weeds. They also are susceptible to heavy rains and erosion. And where's this sludge going to, fall down into? We just got that drain. Indian Creek was just cleaned. So we're finally working and doing what we need to do to get this water that goes in there. And this spillway, that's a huge concern to me. And about burning the piles, that needs to be valid. No, are they burning piles? This is supposed to stop the burning. So you can't be burning behind these berms when you don't think anybody's watching and paying attention. I just really have some really huge concerns. We're going from backwards to forward on this project, and it's just all wrong, just totally wrong. I'm sorry. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. Do we have any others on the line that would like to make any comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Welling. All right. From there, I think we've got all the public comments. What I'll ask now is if anyone would like to make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I would support that.
All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is now closed. So we'll open to questions and discussions at this point. I don't know if there's anybody from the group that has any questions for the applicants or for Ms. Kincaid or anybody in planning. Mr. Gore?
Couple things. It sounds to me like we're talking a little bit about the southeast corner. Of course, I remember that well. It used to be all woods and it was cleared out. So it's my understanding that the owners cleared that out without asking, getting a variance first. Is that correct?
I think what was variance was to leave the trees in as a replacement instead of a berm and plantings, and the trees were removed.
Okay, so the trees were removed.
Right.
And there's no berm or barrier there or anything like that?
A berm, but no trees.
Okay. And are we, I know there's been a lot of issues going on with being in compliance, not in compliance. Do we know if the Mulch King is in compliance with everything that they need to be into right now? Because it sounds to me like they make a lot of decisions, do things, and then ask for a variance later. If I'm misunderstanding, please correct me.
That I can't speak 100% to. I'm not sure. I don't know if Ms. Kincaid's raising her hand or not. Okay, sorry. All right.
I'm not quite certain specifically what Ms. Keene was asking about the variances. I do know that the new variance they're seeking is the windrow height. They were complying with the 12 feet, but started using the piles then as a buffer from the road as opposed to the trees that were there. We also required fencing along that east side and north side, which was white vinyl fence, was also granted a variance because the trees were going to serve as a natural buffer. We also require a berm with plantings on top. And again, that was also a variance that was granted on the east side because the trees and vegetation that was in place was also going to serve as that buffer. So the berm and trees and the fence, all that was to have to install because the trees were there. The trees were removed, so now we have no buffer, but the applicant put in two 16-foot piles of, I'm not sure what the material is because windows in our ordinance it states whether it be product or material. It didn't make any difference. It included all of that, could not exceed 12 feet in height. Now we also have on site the two 16-foot piles to serve as a berm, but then there is also, I believe, material that could possibly be for sale on the south and east side of those berms. So you have merchandise for sale, product for sale outside of the berms or the piles that were to serve as the buffer in lieu of the trees that were on site. So they're seeking that. As far as on the west side, I think Mr. Nitsch addressed some of that. I just wanted to verify, make it the west. It is under the same ownership. The vegetation and trees that are serving as a buffer to the site are fully on that property. That property is not zoned. It is residentially zoned. It is not industrially zoned. So the industrial site at this time, if it's not ever rezoned, could not expand to the west. It's residentially zoned. I know there are wetlands. We don't have a report on that. So that Mr. Nitsch could address that a lot more easily than we can. I just wanted to make sure you understand that even though it's under the same ownership, it is not under the same zoning district and the site cannot be expanded to the west. So those are the things, the three items that he is seeking a variance: to allow the berms to serve as a buffer for the trees, to eliminate the requirement of landscaping and to allow the windrows to serve, to be 4 feet taller than what is required by ordinance. That is a new request, a new variance. The other two were part of the previous variance.
Okay, so going back to the previous variances, you said there was 11 previous variances granted?
There were 11 requests. 2 of the 11 were withdrawn by the applicant. 1 was granted with conditions, and 1 portion was granted and a portion denied on another, and 1 was granted by the fire chief. That pertained to the requirements of the fire department. The Board of Zoning Appeals at that time left it up to the fire chief to make a determination on what their requirements were going to be, and they granted the variance on whatever the decision was by the fire chief. So,
Are they in compliance with the ones that are granted?
no, they're not. The buffering is not, the buffering with the fence line and the plantings are not in compliance. The tree line was removed that was to serve for that buffering.
So Joe, a couple of things. Based on the ordinance, they were required to put in berms and evergreen screening, fencing around the perimeter of the property. And also they were to keep the piles, the windrows, I guess that's the better way to call it, to 12 feet in total height.
Mm-hmm.
To that point, they were granted variances because at the time, the site had plenty of trees to act as screening already. So it did seem a bit redundant to take down trees just to put in more trees. So that was a variance that was felt was adequate. And then to that point, because the property was so well surrounded at that moment by trees, the variance was requested and approved to not to have to allow a fence because it would be impossible to drive vehicles through those trees. So you can see now where we're out of compliance with the original variances that were requested.
Now, granted, there was trees there, and they granted a variance, but then he took those trees down, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Potter.
I've been to the site and I've also been to the Sylvania composting facility. As far as the height of the piles, whether it's 12 feet or 16 feet, I don't really have a problem with a higher height as limited by the equipment that he has. That's what Sylvania does. They pile as high as they can with the equipment that they have available. Now, granted, they're well off the road, so it's almost impossible to see what's going on unless you almost drive into the facility. But so as far as I'm concerned, the variance is for the height of the piles. That's okay. That's an operational issue that would make things better for them. The other 2 requested variances, I have a problem with. These were items that were required from the very beginning, and the applicant was told what was going to be required, and he decided to either do nothing or do something else. I don't agree with allowing the exclusion of these screenings, the screens and the buffering. It, like the ordinance says, it should all be on the subject property, not try and take advantage of what might be going on in an adjoining property, because you never know what's going to happen down the road with that. Our requirement is a double row of evergreens 6 to 8 feet at height I guess personally, I'd be okay with allowing a single row just to give the applicant more room to for his operation. I think a single row would if it's maintained, if the trees start dying, they got to be replaced. But a single row would be okay. But I don't think we should allow a variance in that regard, the exclusion of the trees and the buffering. And then the third, again, that was required in the beginning, and somehow it was either required but not done or what. But anyway, there's no fencing there. And I think there should be a fence around the entire property, whether there's woods or not. That's to protect their operation, protect the public from their operation, and I don't know, it might even be a desirable item for insurance purposes. But anyway, that's my take on the whole.
And hopefully, Ms. Kincaid, you might be able to recall. I remember the variance was put in for exactly this reason, to allow this composting facility to exist in Bedford Township. So this ordinance isn't very old, but I was trying to recall, we did, when I say we, Bedford Township did model the ordinance after other townships already in Michigan. And my question is around the height. What was the determination around the height, the reason for the 12 feet versus anything taller, if you recall? Oh, Ms. Kincaid, you're on mute.
Sorry. We took several different communities and the height for the windrows. I don't know if windrows are of rows or piles of material that is in the process of being converted into compost, or if we're also talking about piles of material that's coming in to move through the process. We looked at several different communities. Most of them kept those pile heights at 12 feet. We felt that was appropriate for this site. It is a much smaller site than several of the other communities allow. We did look at it for an industrial. We actually developed the ordinance to work in Bedford Township as far as lot sizes, parcel sizes that we had available that might work as a composting facility. I don't know if Phil has any further to add on that, because we worked together with the attorneys on developing this ordinance. But we did take information from several different communities that were similar to ours in size and zoning districts, and that's how we developed the ordinance. Phil?
Yeah, I agree with that, Karen. And in addition to that, we consulted with experts in the field. I consulted with a geologist and someone who had developed other compost operations. My understanding that windrows typically are less than 12 feet high and are longer, so that they're able to be turned on a regular basis and even irrigated to help in the process of the decomposition of the material to turn it into topsoil or other usable products. But plus this site where it's at and its acreage, 16 acres, did not lend itself, at least in our view, to really high windrows. A large pile, in my view, is not a windrow, at least not what my research indicated when I looked into it. So that's why we developed it the way we developed it. Even after the ordinance was developed by Jody, Karen, and I, It was modified, I think, several times before it actually got to the township board for approval, and then these variances were requested. So I agree with what Karen said.
Thank you. So I was just kind of going back through some of these requests. I was actually on the planning commission when this went through, so I remember this very vividly. There were a lot of variances requested, and it was because of the current site. Some of this is these variance requests now, I'll be completely blunt, they feel out of convenience for what the current site represents. I don't feel that we're trying to accommodate the site as much as we're just trying to get a variance based on variances that were already requested that weren't compliant to. And now we've done things that were completely null and void of the original variance requests. So my opinion, I would be willing to entertain a motion to not allow this to go through, as I see this as completely different than what we originally had provided, which was over and above what the ordinance had already stated, which that ordinance was very well vetted out and discussed upon and put into place for a reason. And yet back in 2017, a lot of variances were granted. To grant more feels like we're just doing this out of convenience to not have to comply. That's my opinion. I'll of course let others make the motion or comment on it further.
Mr. Lake, I agree with you. To me, this seems like it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. You know, we'll just do what we want and we'll ask for a variance later type deal. So, I mean.
Mr. Wilson?
I tend to agree with, I tend to agree with both of you guys in large part. I'm kind of trying to read through again, you know, what was done previously and now. The one item I guess that I would somewhat tend to agree with in terms of the variances being requested now is specifically that western side where it looked like previously, and so I'm just speaking to that one portion, it looked like previously there was, if I'm reading this correctly, a variance given on the northern and eastern sides because of the vegetation that was there. So I guess I knowing that the trees came down on the east side, I would tend to think that things have changed. And like you said, like maybe a bit more out of convenience, they're looking for something. But I just wondered if that western portion is more within what they had originally had asked for and what was originally approved. The fact that that they do have, albeit on a different parcel and a different zoning, they do have a a buffer of some sort with the natural woods.
Well, I agree there's a buffer, but what I don't agree with is the fact it's on a different piece of property. And granted, the current owner owns both properties, but one's residential, one's industrial. And to combine the two, which they would have to go through a very lengthy process of asking for them to be combined and rezoned at the same time, which I don't think they're going to be able to go do. But to that point, if that property were sold to somebody else, then they're on the hook to keep that buffering as opposed to the actual property owner, which I would definitely not be in favor of.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand what you're saying too. I guess you rely on the fact that the same person owns both pieces now, but like next week they could sell it and the new owner may choose to do something else. So that's no, understood. Or would agree.
Is there any comments, questions? If not, there's an opportunity to entertain a motion.
Chairman Lake, if it's appropriate, I'd like to ask a point of clarity, if I could.
Is that Mr. Jacobs?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Jacobs.
The Telegraph and Smith Road intersection, I guess what I'm starting to hear is that by removal of that it removed the entire variance that was granted previously, if I'm hearing you correctly, or hearing the comments correctly. And what we were seeking was just the variance to not put the fencing around that corner and assuming that the remainder of the variance would remain in place from the original proposal. Not sure if that's a correct interpretation, but that was our assumption. So we were seeking just the variance to not put it around that corner, connecting the trees to the berm at the drive. So just would like to clarify whether the entire developed parcel would have to be enclosed with fence if this is not granted, or if it's just that we have to put the fence between those 2 points.
I guess I'll look for a point of clarity on that. Ms. Kincaid, seeing that, or Mr. Goldsmith, one of the two, seeing that there are still trees over most of the property I think what Mr. Jacobs is asking for is the previous variance allowed for there not to be a fence or screening due to the amount of trees on certain parts of the property. Actually, it used to be all the way around the property. So I think what Mr. Jacobs is asking is, if we do not approve the current variance request that we're reviewing tonight, would that mean that he would have to put a fence all the way around, or would the previous variance still comply if there were woods in that area? Does that make sense?
Are you asking me?
Either you or Mr. Goldsmith. I'm not sure who would be best to answer the question.
I believe it would be up to the Board of Zoning Appeals, because there are still some trees along the more northeast side that may be still in place. There also is are some a flood zone and some wetlands in those areas. So I think it would be up to the Board of Zoning Appeals if they would require some sort of buffering, whether it be plantings and the fence that is required, or however they want to address it, should they want to address it. And then how far north would they want that buffer to run? It's up to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They can make it. Phil, I don't know, do you have anything to add?
I agree with you with what you have stated, Karen. But I think if the board is going to go in that direction, you need to be very careful to describe exactly what it is you are granting the variance on and how it should look when the development of, we talk about buffering, and so there are different standards as to what the buffering could look like. So I think you need to be very careful if you were going to grant any portion of that variance, that what your expectation is, or better stated, what your requirement is for that buffering. Is it a buffer? What's the material of which the buffer is going to be constructed of? The size of the buffer, the height, the width at the base, and whether that buffer will need to include any plantings of either deciduous trees, for example, or any evergreen type trees. If you're going to go in that direction, I think you need to spell it out as to what your expectation is and what your requirement is, what it's going to look like. Otherwise, we seem to spin our wheels on this and get nowhere, and we don't have compliance with the ordinance.
Kincaid, Mr. Goldsmith. I think Mr. Dersch, you had a question or a comment?
Oh, I'm good, Mr. Like Mr. Goldsmith kind of clarified it. It's going to be a tricky way to word this to end up where we all want to end up. I think we have it in our mind, but getting it on paper might be the difficult part.
I saw hands up. I think Ms. Kincaid was before Mr. Potter. I'll get to you in a second, Mr. Potter. Ms. Kincaid.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you refer to H, which is the very back sheet, that is the site plan that is currently proposed to go before the Planning Commission after this evening's decision. So that would be the areas where the trees are identified. I don't know if this will help or not. the two 16-foot piles. And I believe there are some, I said before, some other piles to the south and east of those existing now of product for sale. But this is the most current when I believe Mr. Jacobs and Chris, when you went out, that this is what you found to be on site. Is that correct?
That's more or less correct. Some of these things are showing the way we understand that it needs to be changed to be more compliant with the ordinance. So there are some things that are not necessarily shown the way they currently exist because they need to be brought into conformance with either this revised plan or the original plan.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, Mr. Potter?
Yes, thank you. This comment or question, I guess it is a question, might be directed more towards Phil and or Karen, but specifically on the requested variances numbers 2 and 3, if these are rejected rejected, then the applicant still would be required to comply with whatever the combinations of variances that were approved back in 2017 and the ordinance. Whatever parts of the ordinance had not been revised by our variances that we approved back then. Is that correct?
That's a correct statement, Bob. To the extent a variance was given or awarded previously, and to the extent that that variance now I would say is null and void because of the removal of trees, we revert back to the ordinance, and the appropriate berming and vegetation would have to be applied because a condition of that variance was the existence of trees. When those trees were removed, then we return to what the ordinance requires, and the ordinance requires a multitude of things, including fencing, berming, and the planting of trees.
Okay, thank you. It seems to me then that it would be better to, if we decided that we did not like the two variance requests, numbers 2 and 3, that it would be better to simply vote those down or reject them and not try to adjust or revise or second guess, if you will, the decisions that were made back in 2017. Rather just deny the variance number 2 and 3 and have the applicant revert to whatever the requirements were originally. Seems like that would be simpler, easier to follow, and more fair because that's what was agreed on originally.
I would agree in the fact that both of those items were self-created hardships.
Good point. I didn't.
Chairman Lake, this is Jacobs again. So if I'm hearing that correctly, then I think the way I'm interpreting that is that those sections of the site that are still in compliance with those original variances would be okay, where the trees have been removed and they're no longer consistent with that variance, that we would need to comply with the current ordinance standards, which in this case would be a landscape berm and trees planted along from the northern edge of the trees that where the removal stopped to the berm at the entrance drive. And then we have to put berm and trees in along the westerly line.
And fencing. Excuse me. That might have been out of line.
That's fine, Mr. Potter. All right. If there are no other questions or comments to be made at this point, I would be willing to entertain a motion if somebody's prepared to.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So I understand that the taking the trees down on the Telegraph side there, the southeast corner, I understand all of what you're saying on that. But what I don't get is, so you're saying I have to build a berm and put up a fence? Both? To go back to the 2017? Or just put up a berm and trees along there, or just a fence, one or the other? And then do we have to redo that on our site plan? Or is the site plan that we've already redone and submitted good? I guess I'm just confused as to where everybody seems like they're saying something different than, or doesn't understand what any of us are saying. I guess it's confusing.
Sure. So as of this point, we haven't officially approved or denied anything. There's still just discussion at this point. I would say once we kind of spell it out in the motion, that should provide the clarity you need. So I think in a few minutes here, we'll probably provide that motion, and then we'll get it down on paper, exactly the clarity.
And then the other thing I was going to say is that the windrows themselves are only like 8 feet tall. What we were saying was the two berms that we were proposing to use instead of the trees that were there, or the variance for the fencing that was granted before, we made those as big as we could, thinking that would be better. So, I mean, if you want me to take a bulldozer and plow them down shorter, then obviously I can do that. But none of the actual compost material is higher than probably 8 or 10 feet, because what Phil had said earlier is that when you turn them, the lower they are and longer they are, the faster it turns. So it's not any windrows, but the ordinance itself was specific in saying any material anywhere on site. So if you want the berms lower, then that's not a huge deal. I mean, that would take me a day to bulldoze those berms lower. I was just trying to make those bigger so that it hid the actual processing of all the compost and mulch materials behind it from the Smith and Telegraph Road intersections, which is what I thought everybody wanted. That's why they wanted a fence and a berm with trees on it to begin with, is so nobody had to look at any of that stuff, is what I guess I misunderstood all of that. So if you want me to even remove them altogether and put a 6-foot fence up instead of a 16-foot berm, then everybody can see what's going on. Then I guess you can let me know if that's what we're supposed to do.
So I think at this point, we're ready to make a motion, but to maybe answer that question a bit, I don't know that we're talking directly about the 16-foot berm as much as the variance requests that were granted, or the variance requests that were asked for in here. So we're going to focus on what the variance requests were in the meeting here. And once we've got a firm motion, I think that'll provide the clarity. Mr. Potter? Mr. Potter, you're on mute.
Thank you. The requirements of the applicant have already been stated in a combination of the ordinances and the variances that were either approved, partially approved, or not approved back in 2017. What the items, as I see it anyway, what we're dealing with tonight is the 3 variances in front of us, not anything else.
I would agree with you, Mr. Potter.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dersh?
Yeah, I want to say, I think the sticking point we're struggling with is the fact that the trees were already removed. If we were looking at this from the fact that they were still there and this was going to be an approved deviation, it would probably smooth this process out a little bit for everybody.
I would agree. Mr. Gore?
Piggyback up what Mr. Potter said, the stuff's already been established back in 2017. I think over the last 4 years, people have done whatever they want to do and they don't even remember what they should have done back then, back in 2017. I was trying to write out some type of motion somewhere to the fact of denying all 3 variance requests, but if somebody else wants to take a stab at it and how they want to write it out, I've been trying to pen something out.
What we could do, Mr. Gore, if you are prepared, the group here can provide friendly amendments if there's something missing from your motion. So if you want to go ahead and give it a try, we'll be more than happy to help guide you through it.
I'll give it a try. So I'll move that we deny all 3 variance requests brought by Andrew. I'm going to butcher the last name. How to pronounce the last name? Ms. Kincaid. Nitch from the mulch team. And I'm open to some amendments.
Sure. So I think some of the amendments is you want to be able to provide some reasoning behind why you're denying them. And maybe go by each. Yeah, start with like the first variance request and then provide your reasoning, your rationale, and then the second and the third probably provide some rationale behind why you're denying them.
Going through my notes, simply the trees were already cut down on the southeast corner. There's already been variances made. There's already been accommodations made. I just, they knew what the rules were, the original site plan. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, to put it in words in the form of a motion. I've got a lot of notes scribbled or scratched down.
Mr. Dersh, you have a friendly amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to add really that the basis of the rejection is the lack of a practical difficulty. The conditions created are self-created in the respect that numerous variances were already granted for this property, some of which were complied with, some of which were not complied with. The second part of that, and Mr. Goldsmith may need to help us out, the intent of this rejection is to return the requirements to the existing 2017 ordinance as written. So I'm not sure if that needs to or should be a part of our motion, but I believe that's the board's intent, is to return it to the requirements of a fence and a landscape buffer as written in the ordinance for the area that was cleared on the south and east side. And then the west side is a separate piece of that. It needs to comply with the variances that were already granted for the west side on the property itself.
Mr. Gore, do you accept those amendments to your motion?
Yeah, I do. I like the self-created. They were self-created problems.
Thank you. And then Mr. Goldsmith, I don't know if there's any addition there with Mr. Dersh's comment or amendment.
Well, let's do this. I think both what Joe stated has been well stated, and what Kyle stated has been well stated. Let's take the variances one by one. So let's go to variance number one. It says this section of the ordinance requires that the maximum height of all windrows or any other material being stored on site shall not exceed a total of 12 feet. The applicant is seeking a 4-foot variance to increase the maximum stacking height to 16 feet. In my view, it doesn't have anything to do with the berm, but what it has to do is stacking on site is limited. The stacking height on site is limited to 12 feet. If I understand Mr. Gore's motion and Mr. Dersh's friendly amendment is that the applicant has self-created a situation by stacking in excess of 12 feet. The 12 feet is a reasonable height, taking into consideration the location of this site, and it should remain at 12 feet, and therefore the motion was made to deny the ordinance. Going to variance number two, that section, variance 1503.5 BB, the section of the ordinance requires the perimeter of the entire site utilized for composting operations to be screened and buffered by means of planting a double row of evergreens 6 to 8 feet in height at planting, with no more than a 15-foot spacing and offset by 8 feet. A part of that requirement was given a variance previously, but that was conditioned upon trees remaining at the site. Those trees were removed from the site, and therefore this section of the ordinance becomes once again operable. And if I understand Mr. Gore's motion and the friendly amendment made by Kyle Dersh is that the applicant's situation is self-created in this regard, and by making a motion to deny this portion of the variance, variance number two, you would require the applicant to comply with 1503.5.BB, except as otherwise varied previously. To the extent that it was varied and those trees were cut down, it would revert back to what the ordinance requires. Finally, the third variance requested, a variance to section 1503.5 CC. This section of the ordinance states access to the site shall be controlled to prevent unauthorized dumping during non-business hours. The perimeter of the entire site shall be fenced. The fence shall be a minimum of 6 feet in height and not to exceed a maximum as set by the Planning Commission in connection with its site plan review. The fencing required by this section that is contiguous to a residential zoning district and/or an agricultural zoning district used residentially shall be a solid vinyl coated decorative fence or the equivalent. Such fence shall be placed behind the buffer area required by this ordinance. Access points to the site shall be controlled by lock gates to prevent unauthorized entrance. The use of barbed, razor, or electrified fencing shall be prohibited. Goes on to state that previously a variance was granted to eliminate the perimeter fencing requirement along the western and south perimeter as a berm with landscaping was proposed along both sides, never installed. A variance was also granted to eliminate the fencing along the east and north sides of the site, as an existing heavily wooded area would serve as a natural buffer between Telegraph Road and Indian Creek. So the variance that was previously granted would still be operable, but it would require the installation of a berm with landscaping that was never installed. The other, along Telegraph Road and Indian Creek, those trees were removed. Therefore, the berm and landscaping would be required. So I hope that helps, and I think that addresses what Mr. Gore had in mind when he made his motion and what Kyle Dersh stated when he made his friendly amendment.
Mr. Gore and Mr. Dersh, would you agree?
I would agree.
I guess one point of clarification, Mr. Goldsmith, is the fence would then also be required on the east where the tree was removed, the south side and the west side of the property that aren't in compliance with the landscape buffers. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what the ordinance requires, unless it was varied previously. That's correct. Karen, would you agree with that?
I do agree with that because what we have there now does not comply with the variances that were granted.
Okay. All right, Mr. Wilson, I don't know if you had a friendly amendment or clarification.
Maybe just further clarification on, and if it's already been stated, I apologize, or suggested, but so then on the northern side where the trees remain and that a variance was granted because of the trees, as long as that portion remains within compliance with the variance that was approved, it would not require then the berm or the fencing. Is that correct? It would go. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I think so, Jeff. Whatever variance was granted previously, as long as the applicant, the owner of the site, complies with the terms of those variances, we're not rescinding those variances. So you have to comply. In one instance, at Telegraph and Indian Creek, there can be no compliance because the trees were removed. Therefore, we revert back to the ordinance in its original state, if that makes sense.
So I think that I apologize that the gentleman's name from the
Jacobs.
Yes, Mr. Jacobs had mentioned, or I think was wanting clarification on that. If so, where on the eastern side, at the point that the trees were removed, and then down to the south, and then across to the west, they would need to add the berm, add the trees, that sort of thing, but they would only need to add up to a point to where trees were not cut down, right, on the eastern side, and they would not need to add anything over to on the north side because they are within compliance of the variances that were granted.
As long as they bring the site into compliance and are able to bring the site into compliance with previous variances that were granted.
Okay, understood.
Okay. Great. So we got clarification. We've got friendly amendments. Is there anything else before we vote on the motion? Ms. Kincaid?
Who supported it? I know Kyle made some friendly.
Oh, good point.
I'll take support.
Okay. We got a motion. We've got support. All right. So with that said, then,
Mr. Lake, I think there's a
You
question.
have Jody.
I have a question.
oh, yes.
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure on clarification that on the variances on the east side that were required because of I just want to make sure I have the motion right. On the east side, or I'm sorry, let me rewind. The west side that abut the other property, the berm wasn't required because of the tree line buffer on the neighboring property. So that portion of the property is zoned residential. I just want to make sure we're clear that it would be a vinyl fencing on that westerly portion of the property with the buffers of the trees.
It would revert back to the original ordinance which stated berm buffering which was the trees and also a vinyl fence behind it. Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just needed clarification on that side.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion, we have support. Karen, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Gore?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right. We'll move on to the next item, which is public comment. If there are any still on the phone that would like to comment, not regarding the public hearing, please give your name and address for the record. Okay. Oh, that was for a public comment. I'm sorry, Mr. Welling. Doesn't seem as if we have anyone for public comment. So we'll move on to board and staff comments. We'll start with planning team.
We have not yet reached the deadline for the March meeting. We don't have anything submitted at this time. We will know in the next week, so we will let you know.
Okay. Nothing from Jody. Mr. Goldsmith.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Kohler, if you're still on, anything?
I have nothing, thank you.
We'll move on to the board. We'll start with Mr. Potter.
Just thank you for having me on as an alternate this evening.
Mr. Dersh.
No comments on my end, but there was someone who joined maybe late for the public comment, it appears.
It does appear as if so. Mr. Welling, is that somebody for public comment? Okay. Thank you. This is for public comment. If you would, please give name and address for the record.
This is Lamar Frederick, 3254 Deer Creek Drive in Lambertville. I was going to talk earlier during the public hearing, and I thought, no, I'll stay out of this thing. I was on the Planning Commission when the original site plan came through along, Mr. Lake will remember. And we spent a long time working with the applicant. I was principally concerned about drainage from the northwest to the southeast and into the Indian Creek. Indian Creek, as you may know, is just upstream of our wastewater treatment plant. And we were a lot of concern about whether or not there would be any issues with pollutants getting into the Indian Creek and then in turn cause us problems at the wastewater treatment plant. We were given at the Planning Commission meeting, we were giving all kinds of support from our township engineer that there'd be no problems with this. But now let's take the next step. And Karen will remember this vividly, and so will Mr. Goldsmith. The day or two after the Planning Commission gave its approval with conditions, the supervisor called the applicant and said, "You're open for business." And unfortunately, the applicant did not have time to complete all of the requirements that were listed on the final approval of the site plan. And so some of this was a condition of opening too soon and not having all of the conditions in place before the doors were opened. And so, as many of you have just said, as the business grew and as the things changed in the operation, then some changes had to be made to the ordinances to comply with what business he was doing. For example, there was supposed to be no products sold on the site other than those that were generated on the site. And of course, in order to expand his business, he brought in materials from outside the site. Then there had to be a change in the ordinances there. So you're dealing with a business, and I've watched you tonight, you're dealing with a business that was growing and going and going. And all of a sudden, the original site plan got lost in the operation of the business. And so when people started complaining about the operation and it was non-compliance, the original site plan gets lost in this scheme of things. So I was going to talk earlier, and I thought, no, I'll just wait to see what you people do. And I'm just trying to give you some history, and that not all of this is the businessman's fault, and not all of it is the township's fault. So some of it is just get out of control in one area, and there was no oversight on making sure that the businessman complied with the site plan 2.5 years ago. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick. All right. Is there anyone else on for public comment? Please state name and address for the record. Thank you, Mr. Welling.
Hi, this is Gail Kane, 1056 West Temperance, calling back in again. I want to thank the board here for taking the time to do some valid discussing, some valid interjections as to who, what, why, and where. As Mr. Lamar Frederick just said, it's a lot of this was out of his control. It's a good thing to do for the township, but it's the wrong place. Had there been time involved in putting together something decent, it would be good. We do need to have an option such as this. Like I said, I was part of this way back. But the township has done their due diligence by allowing him to come into the township and making all the adjustments for this. I was concerned with some of what was going to happen because who's going to prevent him from going against the rules just yet another time? I mean, we had a shed pop up in the middle of there that was not allowed. Who's going to go measure this 12-foot, 16-foot? I certainly would not trust his judgment. I would love to go see where his site plan was previous to here. And to have a planning person put a vision on paper and then admit that it really wasn't what was actually realistic for this date and time is really concerning, that there's a lot of non-disclosure going on here. I don't think we can be rewarding anybody for their violations. It's bad enough we're paying for this service and not everybody gets to use it. We have other businesses in this township, and nobody's being paid to run their composting, whether it be here at our front doors or not. So it's, like I said, it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's something we should have, and it's sad that it had to start out and be set up. But we got to watch these wetlands. We've got to watch our impact on Lake Erie. That is something we cannot replace. We really cannot. So as an advocate for the Conservation District and an advanced master gardener, I applaud you for at least taking a look at it and studying it, and hopefully something can come out of this that'll be to the good. Thank you again. Good night.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. All right. Do we have any other public comment, Mr. Welling? Okay, thank you. All right, seeing that there's no more public comment, we already did, well, I think we were in the middle of board and staff comments, so I think we were at board at this point. Mr. Dersch, we'll start with you.
Nothing further on my end.
Mr. Potter.
Thank you for being here, for allowing me to be here.
Thanks for being a part. Mr. Wilson.
No, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Mr. Gore.
I just want to say thanks to everybody for my first meeting on the BZA. It was interesting. I learned a lot and hope to move forward and work with each one of you, and we can get back in person soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, no, just to say thanks, Mr. Potter, for filling in. You're a great pinch hitter. Appreciate it. And then Mr. Gore, welcome to the team. Happy to have you. I'm excited to meet you in person at some point.
Thank you.
I'll make if anyone would like to make a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
I'll support.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.